The United States Supreme Court recently handed down a massive 6-3 ruling that completely alters the ground rules for federal immigration enforcement and green card holders. In the case Blanche versus Lau, the Supreme Court just cleared the way for Border Patrol agents and officers to more freely deny standard entry to green card holders that are returning from a trip abroad if they have committed a crime. Writing for the majority, Justice Thomas held that the federal laws do not require Border Patrol agents to meet a high evidentiary standard before denying immediate reentry status into the United States. They found that the denial can occur simply if a crime has been committed instead of a full conviction. This ruling has triggered a fierce ideological clash on the bench itself, with the liberal wing of the Supreme Court launching a very critical dissent, accusing the conservative majority of handing the government a massive blank check to upend the lives of legal residents. So today we're going to break down this ruling, the two fundamentally distinct legal philosophies that divided the Supreme Court, and what this means now going forward. Now, before we jump into what the Supreme Court did in this ruling, if you like this type of content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and also turn on all notifications to never miss this information when I release it. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR isn't a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always expanding upon their benefits to give you as much as possible as a member. In fact, they have a new membership benefit, a new announcement that's coming this week at Goal, so stay tuned for that as well. But if you want to check them out, you can do so using the links down below. And also, until the end of the month, if you sign up using my code ARMSCHOLAR, you can get $50 off of your individual sign-up fee or $25 off of the family sign-up fee. Now, to understand how this case reached the Supreme Court, we have to look at the facts that led this case to eventually make its way all the way to them. Now, the individual here, Mr. Lau, is a Chinese citizen who became a lawful permanent resident back in 2007. Now, in May of 2012, Mr. Lau was charged in the state of New Jersey with trademark counterfeiting for allegedly storing nearly $300,000 worth of counterfeit clothing. Now, while waiting trial, Mr. Lau took a temporary trip to China. When he flew back into JFK after that trip, that was, I believe, in June of 2012, he assumed that he would be processed normally and allowed back into the country. Now, under federal immigration law, green card holders possess a default right to be treated as already admitted into the country, and they're allowed re-entry, and they don't have to reapply for admission every single time that they return from a short trip. However, there are specific statutory exceptions to that rule. A Border Patrol officer can strip that default status away if a resident has committed certain offenses, including a crime involving moral turpitude. Now, relying solely on the active New Jersey indictment, the Border Patrol officer who came into contact with Mr. Lau declined to formally admit him into the country. Instead, the officer confiscated his permanent green card, gave him temporary paperwork, and paroled him back into the country to face prosecution. Now, a year later, Mr. Lau eventually pled guilty to those charges. Then the federal government used that conviction to launch a formal removal proceeding against Mr. Lau. Because of this, Mr. Lau then filed a lawsuit against the federal government, arguing that the Border Patrol officer jumped the gun. He claimed that at the moment he was standing at the Border Patrol gates, an indictment wasn't proof that he had actually committed a crime. So on first review, an immigration appeals court actually disagreed with Mr. Lau's position and ruled against him. That then led him to file an appeal up to the Second Circuit. And on review, the Second Circuit agreed with Mr. Lau and reversed the lower court ruling against him. The Second Circuit ruled that Border Patrol officers must possess clear and convincing evidence of a crime before stripping a resident status on the spot. Now, after the Second Circuit ruling, the US government sought immediate Supreme Court review of this case. And recently, in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court completely vacated that Second Circuit ruling. Writing for the majority, Justice Thomas established a clear two-step framework for how the Immigration and Nationality Act actually operates. At step 1, which happens right at the border, the statute only requires the commission of the crime to justify regarding that resident as an applicant for admission. At step 2, the actual conviction or formal admission of guilt is what is required later during the formal removal hearing to prove that they are inadmissible. The core of the majority's ruling is that courts have no business reading extra words into federal statutes that Congress chose to actually leave out. Thomas explicitly points out that the statute uses the word committed, not convicted. As the majority put it in their opinion, a person does not commit a conviction. Therefore, if the officer has a valid reason to believe that a disqualifying offense occurred, such as an active criminal indictment, the law allows them to make a quick judgment. They can make a judgment call on the spot and remove that status. Furthermore, the majority rejected the idea that the government must prove its case by clear and convincing evidence at the border gates. Thomas noted that while the government does bear a high burden of proof at the final removal hearing, nothing in the text of the statute imposes that heavy burden on the frontline Border Patrol officers who are tasked with maintaining security and making rapid decisions in real time. Because Mr. Lau eventually pled guilty, the government also fully satisfied its burden of proof at the actual hearing with clear and convincing evidence, according to the Supreme Court. Now, predictably, this interpretation faced a sharp criticism and dissent from the liberal wing of the Supreme Court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was joined by Justice Sotomayor and Kagan, and they filed a lengthy dissent focusing heavily on due process and the presumption of innocence. The dissent argues that by allowing the government to act first and justify its behavior years later at a hearing, the court here is completely undermining the statutory security that a green card holder is supposed to be guaranteed. Justice Jackson tried to highlight the severe real-world consequences, noting that when Mr. Lau was paroled, his permanent green card was confiscated, leaving him in a state of unstable immigration limbo for over a decade. She argues that temporary paperwork makes it incredibly difficult for legal residents to secure housing, open bank accounts, or to maintain employment. From the dissent's perspective, the bedrock American maxim that everyone is innocent until proven guilty should prevent a Border Patrol officer from stripping a permanent resident of their status based on a mere accusation or indictment before a court of law has ever actually found them guilty. Ultimately, this case and decision exposes a profound divide on the Supreme Court regarding the separation of powers and statutory boundaries. For the majority, this case is a straightforward matter of enforcing the literal text passed by Congress, which gives Border Patrol officers the flexibility to make necessary spot judgments without judicial interference. For the dissenters here, in their view, this ruling represents a troubling expansion of executive authority at the expense of individual rights like due process. So what are your thoughts on the Justice Thomas strict textualist reading of this immigration statute and the ruling that was issued by the majority? Do you think the court got this right by sticking strictly to the written text? Or do you think that the practical consequences to green card holders is too severe, and do you agree with the dissenters that this violates the due process rights? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. Drop a comment below. If you like this type of video and you want to ensure that you get videos like this going forward, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and also hit the notification icon to get notified of these types of videos when I release them. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.